Senator Dewell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Senator Hegar. These are complex issues, and they're difficult enough for those of us who are in the medical profession, and that you have worked really hard. I just want to, from a medical perspective, talk about why we're doing this. There's 4 parts to the bill. One is to require abortion clinics to meet standards of an ambulatory surgical clinic. One is to regulate the use of RU-486. One is to regulate physicians who do abortions and how they meet the standard of care for coverage, and the other is to address the now reality that unborn babies at 20 weeks suffer from pain. There are clinics that are not meeting decent standards. We've seen Philadelphia, a story is unfolding in Houston. Women who choose to have an abortion, and we acknowledge that it's legal, are very vulnerable. The abortion industry has fought informed consent. They now fight this bill, I think somewhat in the name of profit. No clinic has to close. We are going to regulate what I would describe now as cavalier use of RU-486, and we are going to require physicians to adhere to the standard of care, which is that a physician take care of his or her patients afterwards, take care of complications, and we acknowledge this pain. For those people that are not in the medical profession, I'd like to point out that just about any area of medicine has conflicting medical literature, whether it's to do with fetal pain or the treatment of hypertension or diabetes or surgical techniques. There's medical literature that would show that perhaps one approach is better than the other. And we're going to hear talk today about medical literature, and we're going to hear conflicting evidence about pain. But I would submit, are we willing to take that chance? Are we willing to take even a chance that a baby being aborted is suffering? There's been much talk in the last 2 weeks about the filibuster by Senator Davis. I think Senator Davis handled herself well within the rules. I was somewhat taken back in the media in the ensuing weeks that there was more talk about her shoes and more talk about her political career than the merits of the bill. She was allowed to speak. Subsequently, our vote, 20 senators had their votes suppressed on the Senate floor. Those 20 senators represent over 16 million Texans. They were not represented. All of us in the legislature have been subject to the power of the gavel. We're subject to the power of the gavel of the Lieutenant Governor by the committees that he assigns us to. Many of us at times have not been happy with that. That goes with the territory. Many of us have been subject to the power of the gavel on points of order. Many of us have been subject to the power of the gavel in terms of bills being heard. Senator Nelson and I are close friends, and I have nothing but the utmost respect for her. There have been times when she has chosen not to give a hearing to one of my bills. That is not unusual in this body. Virtually every chair has had to do that, including myself on the committee that I chair. Members and people here, we just recently commemorated the 150th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. This November, we will recognize the 150th anniversary of the Gettysburg Address. President Lincoln pointed out that 77 years ago that a new nation was conceived under the proposition that all men are created equal. Our founding fathers didn't get everything right. African Americans were not given full citizenship. Women were not given full citizenship. Other people of color, even other nationalities. But we now find ourselves at 17 years later, and we're engaged not in a civil war, thankfully, but in a debate of whether this nation or any nation so conceived can endure what some of us consider an American Holocaust of the 30 million plus babies that have been aborted. Senator Davis is very eloquent in her filibuster, and she stated that she wanted to humbly speak for the people not heard at a committee meeting. And she read testimony from people that were opposed to the bill. We didn't hear the people who weren't allowed to speak that were for the bill. But I want to as this hearing develops and we address these bills, there's some other people that haven't been allowed to speak. And that's the children that would fill these shoes. These are the unborn children that have been aborted, and perhaps the children that were never conceived because of infertility as a direct result of substandard clinics. That is also who is being represented here, and I'm going to leave these shoes here so that people testifying and people watching this can understand that there are people who will never testify at any committee meeting. There are people that will not testify today. There are people that will not testify in the future, that will not be allowed to run for office or have the chance to filibuster. Madam Chair, members, I want to close with what Ronald Reagan chose personally to be on his grave, and that is, I know in my heart that man is good, that what is right will always eventually triumph, and there's purpose and worth to each and every life. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Is there anyone else who would like to speak or ask questions of Senator Hegar before we begin with our witnesses? Senator Zafrini?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I do have questions of Senator Hegar.
Yes, ma'am.
Senator Hegar, as you know, I'm pro-life, and I call myself pro-life, period.
I remember hearing that in the first special session.
Thank you. Just as I remember you hearing you explain your bill, and I had several amendments that I had proposed for your bill during the special session. One would be, if we're looking at the new Senate Bill 1, on page 1 of your bill, line 6, changing the word substantial in reference to substantial medical evidence to some medical evidence. Would you consider that amendment?
I appreciate you were very generous in working with me in the first special session, and we had a lot of great discussions, and I really appreciate that of you and your staff. I firmly believe that substantial medical evidence does exist. I do not believe it's just some. I think today, in the advancement in the last 10 years, and specifically, that a substantial amount of evidence does exist, and I think the word some would highly dilute the amount of evidence that's out there that supports this bill.
Well, then would you consider striking the word substantial?
No, ma'am. I think that substantial adequately and specifically references the amount of evidence that's out there that supports the fact that a child does feel pain at 20 weeks and beyond.
And are we going to hear that substantial medical evidence during the hearing?
I believe we have a significant number of people here today who can testify to that, and I think that the cards are continuing to pour in. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. On page 5 of your bill, Senator Hegar, on line 8, it refers to section 171.046, exceptions, and you make exceptions that do not apply to an abortion performed if there exists a condition in, etc.
Could you, which line, I'm sorry?
The section begins on line 2 of page 5, exceptions, regarding the prohibitions and requirements under section 171.043, .044, and .045B that would not apply to these abortions. On page 8 on line 8 of page 5, you refer to all of these exceptions other than a psychological condition.
Yes.
Would you accept an amendment that would insert the word after other than a psychological condition, unless the psychological condition existed prior to the pregnancy?
You and I had talked about that in the first special session as well, and I have a little concern about that language, but I'm certainly willing to continue to listen to you, to listen to testimony that if this language does not accomplish the specific intent, which I believe it does, that we want to make sure that there is not someone who comes in and says, well, I'm going to do undue harm to myself, and then I'm going to commit suicide, and therefore that would be a physical condition of some type of danger for the lady. I will be willing to continue to listen to you, listen to testimony, but at this time I'm concerned with that language.
All right. Thank you. On page 15 of your bill, Senator Hegar.
Yes, ma'am.
Line 27, B. The viable unborn child has you have the word severe irreversible brain impairment.
Yes.
Would you consider changing those words to severe fetal abnormality, as you did in other sections of your previous bill?
The language that we have in the bill now mirrors the language that we have in statute today, and that's the reason I changed it in the first special session to mirror what we have in current law today, so therefore we were extremely consistent throughout. And so I'm not inclined to do that right now. But again, I'll continue. I'm happy that's what we're here for today, and probably tomorrow and a few more days to visit with you and everybody that is going to provide testimony. I'm here to listen as long as everybody's
Well, if you
willing to
would look at
testify.
that again, because in other bills, we have changed that wording that you have in your bill, that is current statute. But in other bills, we have made those changes, so I would ask you to look at that again.
Would you make sure? Okay, that'll be fantastic. Thank you. Yes,
All
ma'am.
right, thank you. And then, as you know, my questions come from the perspective of a pro-lifer, not as someone who is a pro-choice person. One of my questions is, what does this bill do to make abortion less necessary?
Well, I believe there's several different things this bill accomplishes. In short summary, two different aspects. Number one, it establishes the fact that medical evidence today supports, substantial evidence supports, that an unborn child can feel pain at 20 weeks and beyond, and therefore it's moving the threshold from current law to 20 weeks, which would save the lives of those children because they can feel pain. And we have a whole lot of different states, 34 different states have an earlier threshold than Texas. We were talking, Senator Duell was talking earlier, that it's interesting to me how many European countries, some that we think are much more social in nature than Texas per se, France, Belgium, Denmark, Germany, Greece, Ireland, Italy, Holland, Sweden, all of those have an earlier threshold. And so the 20-week ban protects life earlier by establishing that substantial state interest that a child can feel pain. And then the second portions of the bill, which would deal with the ambulatory surgical centers, the 30-mile rule admittance, as well as following the guidelines of FDA on RU 486, those portions are more about protecting, in my opinion, the health of women because of the nature of having a higher ambulatory surgical center requirement, the 30-mile rule, as well as the RU 486 protocols. And so it's broke up into really two different pieces. But the pre-pain is the specific one that is really trying to adhere to the substantial evidence that's out there of protecting children because they can feel pain.
But it doesn't make abortions less necessary, which was the focus of my question.
I understand. Well, I'm not really sure where you want to go with that question. If you have a follow-up question, I'm sitting here listening.
Well, your Senate Bill 13 during special session, the first special session, for example, focused on the prohibition of an unborn child at 20 weeks.
That is correct.
And it also addressed the issue of fetal pain.
Correct.
Now, you and I disagree about the fetal pain. I, for one, do not believe that there is substantial evidence that indicates that an unborn child at 20 weeks feels pain. I disagree with you, but I'm willing to listen to the evidence. That's why I asked you if you would produce that substantial evidence. I was, however, prepared to vote for that bill, and as you know, I voted for it in committee.
Yes.
On the condition that we would continue to work on it. Because I do believe that that is a pro-life bill. The issue of life and when it exists and whether it exists at 20 weeks, regardless of whether that unborn child feels pain or not. Why do we not have a separate bill that addresses that issue as we did during the first special session?
Well, I think that part of the discussion, as far as my opinion, it's important to have all of the different pieces as one piece of legislation. And as we went through the regular session, there were separate bills, and as we went through the first special session and now in the second, as you recall, in the first special session, there was a combination of both individual bills filed and one entire bill, Senate Bill 5 at the time. And so I think that it's important that we deal with all of these very important issues at one time rather than doing a piecemeal of different pieces of legislation.
There are many people who are in exactly the situation I am, and we are pro-life, period. And over the weekend in Laredo, when I was visiting with a number of people and discussing this bill, they agreed specifically. In fact, they suggested that I wear an orange T-shirt with the word pro-life in pink or in blue, because they agreed specifically with my position that they are pro-life, but oppose these bills because we believe that abortion is the law of the land, and that women deserve access to a safe and legal abortion, and that this bill, the way that it's written, would reduce that access and perhaps put some women in a dangerous situation. But let me ask you some more questions. I asked you if there was anything in this bill that would make abortion less necessary. Is there anything in this bill that seeks to reduce abortion by reducing unintended pregnancies?
And I assume that you're referencing some of the discussion that we had last special session as far as dollars into pregnancy prevention, or whether it would be education. Are those the types of areas that you're talking about, Senator Zaffarani? Adoption, those areas?
No, well, but reducing unintended pregnancies, for example, through sex education.
That's what
Through
I'm asking.
prenatal care,
Because
not necessarily
there was a lot of
adoption after.
discussion during the first special session about those different aspects. This bill is not a funding mechanism for women's health care. That's not on the call, nor is adoption on the call, nor are sex education on the call. If they were on the call, I would be more than happy to sit here and talk about those. I'm more than willing to listen, because I think those are very important issues, and I think they were rightfully brought up during the discussion on Senate Bill 5, and I think they should be a part of the discussion. I've thought a lot, especially about the aspect of adoption. That's one that my wife and I, we've talked about extensively over the last 2 weeks, because it's very sad that people, even though Texas has made great strides in the last 10 years, we've doubled the number of adoptions that's capable here in Texas in the last 10 years. That's amazing. But I think we have a lot of strides yet to make. And it's very sad that people, even though we have children that have very deserving homes in other countries, that people go abroad because it's easier than here. Yet that's not on the call, so I'm not able to really deal with those issues in this bill, or there'd be a point of order on the bill.
Well, I would argue that they are in the call and that amendments would be germane, but that would be my argument. I would assume you would disagree. Are you aware of any testimony related to Senate Bill 1 or any research indicating that women often turn to physicians or clinics for help after trying to self-abort?
Well, we haven't got to the testimony yet on Senate Bill 1.
We shared
With all
that bill
due
testimony
respect,
before
but
the...
I do not recall offhand the testimony on Senate Bill 5 as to that. But
Okay.
I'm sitting here listening all day today and tomorrow, or however long we're here.
Are there any medical associations such as the American College of OBGYNs or the Texas Hospital Association that support this bill?
I remember that they had different concerns, as well as TMA, Texas Medical Association, had some concerns about different aspects of the bill.
Okay. Well, Senator, I look forward to working with you, to continue to work with you, and I certainly hope that you will consider my amendment.
Thank you, Senator.
Thank you.
I
Thank you,
appreciate
Madam
it.
Chair.
Thank you.